The morning Dr. Elena Vasquez received the transmission that would change everything, she was doing something completely ordinary. She was sitting in her office at the Galactic Communication Hub on Luna Station, trying to fix a coffee machine that had been making terrible noises for 3 days. The machine gurgled, wheezed, and produced what could generously be called brown liquid. But Elena had grown attached to its quirky personality. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Come on, Bertha, she muttered, tapping the side of the ancient machine. Just one more cup before you give up entirely. The machine responded with a sound like a dying walrus, followed by a triumphant hiss as it dispensed something that almost resembled coffee. Elena raised the cup in a mock toast to persistence in the face of mechanical adversity. That's when her communication array lit up like a Christmas tree. Elena nearly dropped her coffee as every screen in her office flashed simultaneously. The priority alert was unlike anything she'd seen in 15 years of managing interstellar communications. The source signature made her stomach drop. It was coming from the Zephyrian Collective. The Zephyrians were legendary throughout the galaxy for their absolute mastery of logic and reason. They were the species that had solved the unified field theory in an afternoon, created perfect mathematical models for predicting social behavior, and built civilizations that ran with clockwork precision. They were also notoriously difficult to communicate with because they found most other species frustratingly illogical. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she opened the transmission. The message was brief and formal, written in the precise, mathematical language the Zephyrians preferred. Greetings, Human Communication Specialist Vasquez. The Zephyrian Collective requests immediate consultation regarding anomalous data patterns detected in human communication samples. Standard logical analysis protocols have proven insufficient. Your presence is required at Zephyrian Prime Station within 72 standard hours. Priority level maximum. Elena read the message 3 times before it sank in. The Zephyrians, who had never asked for help from anyone, were asking for her help. With human communication patterns, no less. She immediately sent a response confirming her arrival, then sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. What could possibly confuse a species that had perfected logical thinking? What patterns in human communication could be so anomalous that the galaxy's greatest analytical minds couldn't figure them out? Elena's journey to Zephyrian Prime Station took her through 3 different star systems, each more orderly and geometrically precise than the last. The closer she got to Zephyrian space, the more obvious it became that everything had been planned, calculated, and optimized, down to the smallest detail. The station itself was a marvel of engineering that hurt to look at directly. Every surface was perfectly smooth, every angle precisely calculated for maximum efficiency. The docking bay where Elena's transport arrived was so clean it seemed to glow with its own internal light. There wasn't a single unnecessary decoration or element anywhere to be seen. Elena stepped off her transport carrying a small bag and wearing her most professional outfit, a simple blue jumpsuit that she hoped would meet Zephyrian standards of practicality. She was met immediately by her escort, a tall, slender being with silvery skin that seemed to shimmer with mathematical equations. The equations flowed across the Zephyrian's skin like living text, constantly updating and recalculating. "Dr. Vasquez," the being said, its voice carrying the musical quality of perfect mathematical harmonics. "I am Computational Analyst ZYX7749. I have been assigned to facilitate your integration into our research protocols." Elena extended her hand for a handshake, then quickly withdrew it when she realized the gesture might not translate well. "Thank you for having me, Analyst ZYX7749. I have to admit, I'm curious about what's got the collective so puzzled." ZYX7749's equations shifted to what Elena assumed was the equivalent of a frown. "Puzzled" is an insufficient descriptor. The data patterns we have encountered represent a fundamental challenge to our understanding of logical communication structure. We have designated this phenomenon as a Category 7 anomaly. As they walked through the station's corridors, Elena noticed that every Zephyrian they passed stopped what they were doing to stare at her. The equations on their skin flickered and changed rapidly, as if they were trying to process her presence and failing to reach satisfactory conclusions. "Is everything all right?" Elena asked, feeling increasingly self-conscious under the weight of so many analytical gazes. Your presence generates numerous computational variables that our standard behavioral prediction models cannot account for. ZYX7749 explained matter-of-factly. Your walking pattern deviates from optimal efficiency by 23.7%. Your clothing choices appear to prioritize aesthetic considerations over functional necessity. Your facial expressions change without logical correlation to external stimuli. These factors create uncertainty. Elena couldn't help but smile at that. I'm sorry if I'm causing problems just by existing. ZYX7749 stopped walking entirely, its equations flashing in rapid sequence. You have just demonstrated the exact phenomenon we require your assistance with. Your statement contained no logical basis for apology, as you have committed no quantifiable error. Additionally, your facial expression suggests amusement rather than genuine regret. This type of communication inconsistency is precisely what we cannot process. They continued down the corridor, passing laboratories where teams of Zephyrians worked in perfect synchronized harmony. Elena watched through transparent walls as researchers moved in calculated patterns, their every action predetermined and optimized. It was like watching a ballet performed by living computers. Dr. Vasquez, ZYX7749, said as they approached a large door marked with complex mathematical symbols. Before we proceed, I must inquire about your qualifications for analyzing illogical communication patterns. Our research indicates that humans frequently engage in forms of expression that serve no apparent logical purpose. Elena paused at the threshold. Well, I suppose that's true. We do tend to say things that don't make strict logical sense, but that doesn't mean they don't serve a purpose. Please elaborate on the purpose of illogical communication. Elena thought about how to explain something that seemed so natural to her. Sometimes we communicate to share emotions, or to build social bonds, or just to, have fun. Not everything has to serve a logical function. The equations on ZYX7749's skin stopped moving entirely for several seconds. This concept of fun appears frequently in our data samples. We have been unable to construct a logical framework for understanding its function. That's probably because fun isn't really about logic, Elena said. It's about enjoyment, about doing things that make you feel good even if they don't accomplish anything specific. The door in front of them slid open to reveal a vast chamber filled with the most advanced analytical equipment Elena had ever seen. Holographic displays showed complex data streams. Three-dimensional models rotated slowly in the air, and dozens of Zephyrian researchers worked at stations that hummed with computational power. At the center of the chamber stood a figure that Elena immediately recognized as someone of great importance. This Zephyrian was larger than the others, with equations that flowed in more complex patterns across skin that seemed to contain the depth of space itself. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made Elena's teeth ache. Dr. Vasquez, the figure said, I am Prime Computational Director Nexus-1. I have overseen the Collective's analytical protocols for 847 standard years. In that time, we have successfully analyzed and categorized every form of communication encountered in our galaxy. Until now. Elena felt the weight of dozens of alien gazes focusing on her. What exactly have you found that's so troubling? Nexus-1 gestured to one of the holographic displays, which immediately showed a complex data visualization. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 months ago, we began intercepting routine human communications as part of our ongoing galactic social mapping project. We expected to find patterns consistent with other species' communication structures. Instead, we encountered something unprecedented. The display changed to show what looked like a transcript of human conversation. Elena recognized it as the kind of casual chat that might happen between friends or family members. Observe, Nexus-1 continued. In this exchange, human subject A states, I told my wife she was drawing her eyebrows too high. She looked surprised. Human subject B responds with what our analysis indicates is a positive emotional reaction. However, we cannot determine the logical basis for this response. Elena read the transcript and immediately understood. That's a joke. A pun, specifically. The humor comes from the double meaning of surprised, both the emotion and the physical appearance of raised eyebrows. The entire chamber fell silent. Every Zephyrian in the room turned to stare at Elena, their equations flickering in what she was beginning to recognize as confusion. A joke, Nexus 1 repeated slowly. Please define this term with logical precision. Elena realized she was about to attempt something that might be impossible, explaining humor to beings who had perfected logic. A joke it's a form of communication designed to create amusement through unexpected connections, wordplay, or absurd situations. The purpose is to make people laugh or smile. But what logical function does this serve? Asked ZYX7749. How does creating amusement contribute to survival, reproduction, or social efficiency? Well, it doesn't exactly, Elena said. Jokes are social bonding mechanisms. They help people connect with each other, relieve stress, and just enjoy each other's company. Not everything humans do has to serve a survival function. The equations on Nexus 1's skin began moving in increasingly complex patterns. This is problematic. Our analysis protocols are designed to identify logical communication purposes. If humans engage in purposeless communication, our models cannot generate accurate predictions. Elena was beginning to understand the scope of the problem. How much human communication have you analyzed? Approximately 847,000 hours of recorded human interactions across 23 different cultural contexts, Nexus 1 replied. Of this data, 7% contains elements we cannot logically categorize. These elements appear to serve no functional purpose, yet generate consistent positive responses from other humans. Another Zephyrian researcher approached the group, its equations flashing in urgent patterns. Prime Director, we have encountered additional anomalies in the most recent data batch. Human subjects appear to be engaging in communication patterns that deliberately contradict logical expectations. A new display activated, showing another transcript. Elena read it and had to suppress a laugh. It was a classic dad joke. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. This statement, the researcher continued, contains factual information about atomic structure, while simultaneously suggesting that atoms are untrustworthy due to their propensity for fabrication. The logical inconsistency is clear, yet our monitoring indicates that human subjects find this amusing. Elena looked around the chamber at dozens of the galaxy's most brilliant analytical minds, all completely baffled by a simple dad joke. This is the pattern that's been giving you trouble? Dad jokes? Please define dad jokes with logical precision, Nexus 1 requested. Elena thought about how to explain something that was quintessentially human to beings who had never experienced anything illogical. Dad jokes are a specific category of humor characterized by wordplay, puns, and deliberately predictable punchlines. They're called dad jokes because they're stereotypically told by fathers to their children. The humor often comes from how obviously constructed the joke is, rather than from surprise or cleverness. But if the humor is derived from obviousness, why would humans find it amusing? Asked ZYX7749. Logic would suggest that predictable outcomes should generate minimal interest. That's exactly what makes them funny, Elena explained. Dad jokes are amusing because they're so obviously jokes. There's a kind of innocent charm to them. They're not trying to be sophisticated or clever. They just are what they are. The chamber filled with the sound of computational processing as dozens of Zephyrian minds tried to analyze this explanation. Elena watched equations flow faster and faster across their skin, creating patterns that became increasingly chaotic. Dr. Vasquez, Nexus 1 said finally, we require a practical demonstration. Our theoretical models cannot process this concept without observational data. Elena blinked. You want me to tell you a dad joke? Correct. We need to observe the mechanism by which illogical communication generates positive responses. Elena looked around the chamber full of expectant alien faces. Never in her career had she imagined that interstellar diplomacy would require her to perform stand-up comedy for an audience of living computers. All right, she said, taking a deep breath. Here's a classic one. Why don't eggs tell jokes? The Zephyrians leaned forward collectively, their equations slowing to focus on her words. Because they'd crack each other up. Elena delivered the punchline with a slight smile, the same way her own father had told her countless jokes when she was a child. She waited for the response. The silence that followed was absolute. Every Zephyrian in the chamber had gone completely still, their equations frozen in mid-calculation. Elena began to worry that she had somehow broken them. Then, slowly, the equations began moving again, but instead of their usual smooth, logical patterns, they were chaotic, jumping and flickering in ways that Elena had never seen before. "Prime Director," one of the researchers said, its voice carrying harmonics of distress. "The communication sample has generated a logic cascade failure. My analysis protocols are unable to process the relationship between egg fragility and humor production." Another researcher added, "The wordplay mechanism appears to function through deliberate linguistic ambiguity. This contradicts optimal communication efficiency standards." Elena watched in fascination as the most logically advanced beings in the galaxy struggled with something that 5-year-old human children found perfectly natural. "It's not supposed to make logical sense," she said gently. "That's the whole point." Nexus 1's equations were moving in patterns that looked almost frantic. "Dr. Vasquez, you are suggesting that humans deliberately engage in communication that serves no logical purpose, and, furthermore, find enjoyment in this inefficiency?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Elena confirmed. "In fact, the more obviously illogical a dad joke is, the funnier humans tend to find it. We enjoy the absurdity." "This is impossible," declared the researcher who had first approached them. "Absurdity cannot generate positive responses in logical beings. Our models indicate that inefficiency should produce negative emotional states." Elena realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. The most logical species in the galaxy confronting the fundamental illogic of human nature. "But you're not dealing with logical beings," she said. "You're dealing with humans. We're logical when we need to be, but we're also emotional, creative, and, yes, sometimes deliberately absurd." She paused, watching the equations on their skin continue their chaotic dance. "Let me ask you something. When you solved the unified field theory, how did that make you feel?" "Feel?" Nexus 1 repeated. "The successful completion of a logical proof generates satisfaction through the achievement of computational efficiency." "Right. But did it make you happy? Did you enjoy the process?" The chamber fell silent again. Elena could practically hear the computational processes grinding to a halt as the Zephyrians tried to analyze the concept of enjoyment in relation to logical achievement. "The process of problem-solving generates positive neural feedback," ZYX7749 said slowly. "This feedback serves to reinforce beneficial cognitive behaviors." "So you do enjoy things," Elena said. "You just enjoy logical things. Humans enjoy logical things too, but we also enjoy illogical things. We enjoy the surprise of an unexpected punchline, the cleverness of wordplay, the shared experience of laughing together." She gestured to the transcript still displayed on the holographic screen. "That dad joke about eggs? It's not funny because it makes sense. It's funny because it doesn't make sense in a way that's somehow perfect. The absurdity is the point." Nexus 1 approached Elena, its massive form casting complex shadows across the chamber. "Dr. Vasquez, you are presenting us with a fundamental paradox. You claim that humans derive positive experiences from inefficiency and illogic. This contradicts every principle of evolutionary development and social optimization." Elena thought about how to explain something that seemed so obvious to her. "Maybe that's because you're thinking about it backwards. Maybe illogic isn't inefficient for humans. Maybe it serves purposes that pure logic can't." "Such as?" asked ZYX7749. "Well, humor helps us bond with each other. It relieves stress and tension. It helps us cope with difficult situations by finding something to laugh about. It's a way of showing creativity and intelligence through wordplay and clever connections. It makes life more enjoyable." Elena paused, looking around at the assembled Zephyrians. "Look at it this way. You've created a perfect logical society, but have you ever laughed? Have you ever done something just because it was fun, even if it served no practical purpose?" The equations on Nexus 1's skin slowed, then began moving in entirely new patterns that Elena had never seen before. Dr. Vasquez, you are suggesting that efficiency and logic may not be the optimal goals for all aspects of existence. I'm suggesting that maybe there's more to life than optimization, Elena said. Maybe sometimes the best response to a situation isn't the most logical one. Maybe sometimes the most human thing to do is to make a joke. She looked around the chamber at dozens of beings who had spent their entire civilization perfecting logical thinking, and she made a decision that would change everything. Want to hear another one? She asked. The Zephyrians exchanged glances, their equations flickering in what Elena was beginning to recognize as uncertainty. Finally, NEXUS-1 spoke. Proceed with your demonstration, Dr. Vasquez. We require additional data to analyze this phenomenon. Elena grinned. Why don't scientists trust atoms? You have already provided this communication sample, ZYX7749 observed. No, that was about atoms making up everything. This is a different joke, Elena said. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. She delivered the punchline with perfect timing, then waited for the response. The chaos that followed was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. The equations on every Zephyrian skin began moving in wildly erratic patterns, creating light shows that filled the chamber with flickering mathematical poetry. Some of the researchers actually stumbled backward, their perfectly coordinated movements suddenly clumsy and uncertain. The communication sample is identical to the previous sample, one researcher said, its voice carrying harmonics of confusion. Yet the context suggests different meaning. This is logically impossible. Elena laughed, and the sound seemed to reverberate through the chamber in ways that made the Zephyrians' equations move even faster. That's because it's the same joke. The humor comes from the fact that it works on multiple levels. Atoms literally make up everything in the physical sense, but makeup can also mean fabricate or lie. It's a pun. But why would humans find humor in linguistic ambiguity? Asked Nexus-1. Ambiguity reduces communication efficiency. Because the ambiguity is the joke, Elena explained. We're not trying to communicate information efficiently. We're trying to play with language, to find unexpected connections, to share a moment of silliness. She looked around the chamber at the assembled computational minds, all of them struggling to process something that seemed so natural to her. Let me try a different approach. You said you feel satisfaction when you solve logical problems, right? Correct, Nexus-1 confirmed. Well, jokes are like logic puzzles for humans. When we hear a setup, part of our brain tries to guess where it's going. When the punchline surprises us or makes an unexpected connection, we get a little burst of satisfaction. It's not the same as solving a mathematical equation, but it's a similar kind of mental reward. Elena paused, watching the equations on their skin begin to slow and organize into more recognizable patterns. The difference is that logical problems have correct answers. Jokes have funny answers. And sometimes, the funnier something is, the less logical it becomes. Dr. Vasquez, ZYX7749, said its voice carrying new harmonics that Elena couldn't identify. Are you suggesting that humans have evolved a parallel processing system for analyzing illogical information? I guess so, Elena said. I mean, I never thought about it that way, but yeah. We can think logically when we need to, but we can also think creatively, emotionally, and humorously. There are different kinds of thinking. The chamber began to fill with the sound of intensive computational processing as dozens of Zephyrian minds tried to integrate this new information into their understanding of human communication. This explains numerous anomalies in our data, one researcher announced. Human subjects frequently engage in communication patterns that appear to prioritize emotional resonance over informational accuracy. And they respond positively to other humans who demonstrate facility with these illogical communication modes, added another. Elena watched in fascination as the galaxy's most logical beings began to deconstruct the mechanics of human humor. It was like watching someone try to explain why music was beautiful by analyzing the mathematical relationships between frequencies. Dr. Vasquez, Nexus-1 said, approaching her with measured steps, we require additional data samples to complete our analysis. Will you provide us with more examples of human humor? Elena grinned. I thought you'd never ask, but I should warn you, some of these are going to be even more illogical than the ones I've already told you. We have prepared additional computational resources, Nexus-1 replied. Proceed with your demonstration. Elena thought for a moment, then selected one of her favorite dad jokes from her mental collection. All right, here's one that's particularly absurd. I invented a new word, plagiarism. She delivered the punchline with a slight pause, the same way her uncle had taught her when she was 12. The response was immediate and dramatic. Every Zephyrian in the chamber stopped what they were doing, their equations freezing in mid-calculation. The silence stretched for several seconds before the computational chaos began again. The communication sample contains a logical contradiction, one researcher said, its voice carrying harmonics of distress. The human claims to have invented a word that, by definition, cannot be invented. Furthermore, added another, the act of claiming to have invented, quote, plagiarism is itself an example of plagiarism, creating a recursive logical loop. Elena nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. That's what makes it funny. The joke is self-referential and contradictory. It's impossible, but in a way that's somehow perfect. She looked around the chamber at the assembled beings, all of them struggling to process humor that violated every principle of logical communication. This is what I mean about humans enjoying absurdity. We don't just tolerate contradiction. Sometimes we celebrate it. Nexus 1 approached Elena, its massive form moving with careful precision. Dr. Vasquez, you are presenting us with evidence that humans have developed cognitive mechanisms specifically designed to process and enjoy logical impossibilities. I suppose that's one way to put it, Elena said. We call it a sense of humor. But this suggests that human cognition operates on fundamentally different principles than optimal logical processing, ZYX7749 observed. Your species has developed parallel systems for analyzing information that deliberately ignore efficiency and accuracy. Elena considered this. Maybe that's why we've survived so long. Pure logic is great for solving problems, but it's not so great for dealing with uncertainty, stress, or social bonding. Humor helps us cope with things that don't have logical solutions. She paused, looking around the chamber. Plus, it makes life more fun. And before you ask, no, I can't give you a logical definition of fun. It's just something that feels good. The equations on Nexus 1's skin began moving in patterns that Elena had never seen before. They were slower than the usual logical calculations, but more complex, with harmonics and rhythms that seemed almost musical. Dr. Vasquez, Nexus 1 said finally, you have presented us with the most significant analytical challenge in the history of our civilization. We have spent centuries perfecting logical thinking. Yet you suggest that the most successful species in the galaxy has deliberately cultivated illogical thinking. Elena felt a sudden weight of responsibility. She was representing not just humanity, but an entire way of thinking that was completely foreign to these beings. I don't think it's that we've cultivated illogical thinking. I think we've cultivated multiple kinds of thinking. We can be logical when we need to be, but we can also be creative, emotional, and yes, silly. She gestured to the displays showing human communication samples. Look at your data again. Yes, humans tell jokes and make puns and say things that don't make strict logical sense. But we also build spaceships, solve complex problems, and create art. We're not illogical. We're multilogical. The chamber filled with the sound of intensive processing as dozens of Zephyrian minds tried to integrate this concept into their understanding of intelligence and communication. Multilogical, Nexus 1 repeated. You are suggesting that optimal intelligence may require multiple processing systems rather than a single perfected logical framework. I'm suggesting that maybe there's no such thing as optimal intelligence, Elena said. Maybe intelligence is about being able to think in whatever way the situation requires. Sometimes you need logic, sometimes you need creativity, sometimes you need humor. She looked around the chamber at beings who had spent their entire existence pursuing perfect logic, and she felt a sudden surge of affection for them. You know what? I think you're ready for the advanced material. Advanced material? ZYX7749 asked. Elena grinned. Puns. Lots and lots of puns. Fair warning. These are going to hurt. And with that, Elena Vasquez, xenolinguist and accidental comedian, prepared to introduce the galaxy's most logical beings to the wonderful, terrible world of human wordplay. The equations on their skin began moving faster in anticipation, and Elena couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, she was about to witness something unprecedented. The birth of humor in minds that had never known laughter. She cleared her throat and began. I used to hate facial hair, but then it grew on me. The computational chaos that followed would later be recorded in Zephyrian history as the beginning of the Great Logic Reformation. But Elena was just getting started. News of Elena's demonstration traveled through Zephyrian Prime Station with the speed of a computational virus. Within hours of her initial joke session, reports began flooding in from research departments across the facility. Zephyrian scientists who had observed the session remotely were experiencing what their medical diagnosticians could only describe as cognitive anomalies. Dr. Quantum Prime, the station's chief medical analyst, arrived at the communication chamber, accompanied by a team of specialists carrying diagnostic equipment that hummed with concerned energy. His equations flowed in tight, worried spirals across his crystalline skin as he approached Elena. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, his harmonic voice carrying undertones of professional alarm, "we need to discuss the effects your demonstrations have had on our research staff." Elena looked up from the comfort chair the Zephyrians had provided for her, where she'd been reviewing human comedy databases on her portable device. "Effects? What kind of effects?" Quantum Prime activated a holographic display that showed brain scan equivalents of several Zephyrian researchers. The normally smooth, symmetrical patterns of Zephyrian neural activity were interrupted by strange, chaotic bursts that pulsed in irregular rhythms. 17 of our staff members who witnessed your humor demonstrations are experiencing unprecedented neural activity, Quantum Prime explained. They report intrusive thoughts containing illogical word combinations and an inexplicable urge to share these combinations with colleagues. Elena stared at the scans, recognition dawning slowly. "Oh no, are you telling me that I've accidentally infected your people with the ability to make puns?" "If by infected you mean introduced a cognitive pattern that spreads through social interaction and resists logical analysis, then yes," Quantum Prime confirmed. "Researcher Helix 991 approached me this morning and said, 'I wondered why the baseball kept getting bigger. Then it hit me.' When I requested clarification, they could only respond with what they described as, quote, 'positive emotional resonance.'" Elena covered her face with her hands, torn between horror and helpless laughter. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that humor could be contagious for your species." "Contagious may be an insufficient descriptor," interjected Nexus One, who had been monitoring the situation from his central command position. "Our preliminary analysis suggests that exposure to humor patterns creates persistent changes in Zephyrian cognitive architecture. The affected individuals appear to be developing new neural pathways optimized for processing linguistic ambiguity and logical inconsistency." The implications of this hit Elena like a freight train. She had come here to help the Zephyrians understand human communication, not to fundamentally alter their brain chemistry. "Can it be reversed? Can you help them go back to normal?" Quantum Prime's equations shifted to patterns Elena was beginning to recognize as uncertainty. That is the most troubling aspect of this phenomenon. When we asked the affected researchers if they wished to return to their previous cognitive state, they uniformly declined. Researcher Helix 991 specifically stated that they found their new thought patterns, quote, "surprisingly enjoyable." Elena felt a mix of fascination and guilt. "So they're enjoying being able to understand humor?" "More than enjoying," Quantum Prime corrected. "They appear to be actively seeking opportunities to experience and create more instances of what you call jokes." Researcher Vector 432 has spent the last 3 hours attempting to construct original wordplay. Their latest effort was, "Why did the photon go to therapy?" Because it had too many wavelength issues. Despite her concern, Elena couldn't help but smile. "That's actually not bad for a beginner." The medical team exchanged glances, their equations flickering in synchronized alarm. "Dr. Vasquez," Quantum Prime said carefully, "are you suggesting that the creation of humor is a skill that can be developed and improved?" "Of course," Elena replied. "Humans spend years learning how to be funny. Some people are naturally better at it than others, but everyone can get better with practice." She paused, realizing the implications of what she was saying. "Wait, are your people trying to get better at making jokes?" "Correct," Nexus One confirmed from his position at the central command console. "The affected researchers have begun what they describe as, quote, humor practice sessions. They gather in small groups and attempt to generate original instances of wordplay and logical contradiction." Elena's device chimed with an incoming message. She glanced at it and saw that it was from her supervisor back on Luna Station, marked with urgent priority flags. Dr. Vasquez, the message read, we're receiving reports from monitoring stations throughout human space about unusual transmissions from Zephyrian territory. The signals appear to be jokes, extremely bad jokes. The Galactic Communication Council is demanding an explanation. Please advise on current situation. Elena showed the message to Nexus 1, whose equations immediately shifted to patterns of deep concern. It appears the phenomenon has spread beyond our initial research group, he said. We must convene an emergency session of the Collective Council. Within an hour, Elena found herself standing in the most impressive chamber she had ever seen. The Collective Council chamber was a vast spherical space where hundreds of Zephyrian leaders floated at calculated positions throughout three-dimensional space. Each council member was connected to the others through streams of flowing equations that created a living mathematical mandala of staggering complexity. At the center of this arrangement floated Supreme Coordinator Omega Alpha, the oldest and most computationally advanced Zephyrian in existence. When it spoke, its voice resonated through harmonics that seemed to vibrate through Elena's bones. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Omega Alpha intoned, you stand before the Collective Council, under circumstances unprecedented in our 7-million-year history. Your presence has introduced a cognitive modification that is spreading through our population at exponential rates. Elena felt very small floating in the center of all this mathematical majesty. Supreme Coordinator, I want to assure the Council that this was completely unintentional. I came here to help analyze human communication patterns, not to change Zephyrian thinking. Yet change us you have, replied Council Member Theta 99, whose equations pulsed with what Elena was learning to recognize as frustration. Our latest reports indicate that 847 individuals across 17 research facilities have been affected by what our medical teams are calling, quote, humor syndrome. Another council member, designated as Phi Prime, added their own concerns. The affected individuals are exhibiting behaviors that compromise operational efficiency. They interrupt serious discussions to share funny observations. They modify official communications to include what they call puns. They appear to derive satisfaction from causing other Zephyrians to experience the cognitive dissonance associated with logical contradiction. Elena listened to the litany of complaints with growing amazement. You're describing the development of a sense of humor, she said. That's actually remarkable. I've never heard of a species developing humor as an adult cognitive function. Is this humor sense permanent? Asked Omega Alpha. Will our affected population members be able to resume normal logical operations? I don't know, Elena admitted. In humans, humor is integrated with logical thinking from childhood. We don't see it as separate from logic, just as a different kind of logic. Maybe your people are developing the same integration. She paused, looking around at the assembled council members. Have you considered that this might not be a problem to be solved, but an opportunity to be explored? The mathematical mandala of connected equations suddenly went completely still. The silence in the chamber was so profound that Elena could hear her own heartbeat. Explain, Omega Alpha commanded. Elena took a deep breath, knowing that her next words could determine the future of an entire civilization. What if humor isn't a flaw in logical thinking? What if it's an enhancement? What if the ability to process multiple layers of meaning, to find connections between seemingly unrelated concepts, to enjoy paradox and contradiction? What if all of that makes thinking more powerful, not less? Impossible, declared Theta 99. Logical efficiency requires the elimination of contradictory processing patterns. Does it? Elena challenged. Your people have achieved perfect logical thinking, but you've also become predictable. You follow algorithms. You optimize for known parameters. But what happens when you encounter something genuinely new, something that doesn't fit your existing logical frameworks? She gestured around the chamber. Like human humor. Your perfect logic couldn't process it because it operates on principles your algorithms never accounted for. But your people who've been infected with humor are developing new ways of thinking that can handle paradox and ambiguity. Council member Sigma 77 spoke up, its equations moving in thoughtful patterns. Are you suggesting that humor represents an evolutionary advancement in cognitive capability? I'm suggesting it represents a different kind of cognitive capability, Elena replied. Not better or worse than pure logic, just different. And maybe having both kinds of thinking available makes you more adaptable, more creative, more complete. The council chamber filled with the sound of intensive computational activity, as hundreds of the galaxy's most advanced minds processed this concept. Elena waited, knowing that the next few minutes could change everything. Finally, Omega Alpha spoke. Dr. Vasquez, we require a practical demonstration of your hypothesis. If humor represents an enhancement rather than a degradation of cognitive function, then individuals possessing this capability should demonstrate superior performance in tasks requiring adaptive thinking. Elena felt a surge of excitement. You want to test whether funny Zephyrians are better problem solvers than non-funny Zephyrians? Correct. We will design a series of challenges that require flexible thinking and novel solution approaches. We will compare the performance of affected and unaffected individuals. That's brilliant, Elena said. But I have one request. Let me work with the affected individuals to help them develop their humor capabilities. If we're going to test the value of human-style thinking, we should make sure they're as good at it as possible. The equations flowing between council members pulsed with rapid calculations. After several minutes of mathematical discussion, Omega Alpha rendered the decision, quote, "You will have access to all affected individuals for training purposes. However, this access comes with conditions. You must also work with our research teams to document and analyze the mechanisms by which humor affects cognitive function. We require complete understanding of what you are introducing to our population." Elena nodded eagerly. I can do that. Actually, studying how your people develop humor might teach us things about human cognition that we never understood before. Over the following days, Elena found herself in the unprecedented position of being the galaxy's first interspecies comedy instructor. The affected Zephyrians proved to be surprisingly enthusiastic students, approaching humor with the same systematic dedication they applied to everything else. Her first class consisted of 12 Zephyrians who had been among the earliest to develop humor syndrome. They arranged themselves in a perfect circle around Elena, their equations flickering with eager anticipation. Today we're going to work on joke construction, Elena announced. Specifically, we're going to learn about timing, setup, and punchline delivery. Researcher Helix 991 raised a crystalline appendage. Dr. Vasquez, we have been attempting to optimize our humor output through systematic analysis of successful joke structures. However, our efficiency ratings remain suboptimal. Elena tried not to laugh. That's because you're approaching it too systematically. Humor isn't about optimization. It's about surprise, about the unexpected connection, about the perfect, imperfect timing. She looked around the circle of earnest alien faces. Let me show you what I mean. Vector 432, tell us your photon therapy joke again. Vector 432's equations brightened with what Elena was learning to recognize as pride. Why did the photon go to therapy? Because it had too many wavelength issues. Good, Elena said. Now, tell it again, but pause for just a beat before the punchline. Let the anticipation build. Vector 432 repeated the joke with the suggested pause. The other Zephyrians' equations flickered in what Elena realized was the equivalent of polite laughter. Better, Elena confirmed. The pause gives your audience time to try to guess the punchline, which makes the actual punchline more satisfying. Now, who wants to try creating an original joke? For the next 2 hours, Elena guided her students through the basics of humor construction. She taught them about wordplay, about subverting expectations, about the rule of 3. She watched in fascination as beings who had spent their entire existence pursuing perfect logic, deliberately crafted, imperfect, illogical statements designed to generate amusement. The breakthrough came when researcher Nova 845, who had been quietly observing the entire session, suddenly spoke up. Dr. Vasquez, Nova 845, said, "I believe I understand the fundamental mechanism. Humor operates by creating temporary logical frameworks that appear consistent but contain hidden contradictions. The cognitive satisfaction comes from recognizing the contradiction and appreciating the elegance of its construction. Elena stared at Nova 845. That's actually a pretty sophisticated analysis of humor theory. Furthermore, Nova 845 continued, this process requires exactly the kind of flexible thinking that would be valuable in analyzing novel problems or unexpected situations. Humor doesn't replace logic. It supplements it with pattern recognition capabilities optimized for handling ambiguity and paradox. The other Zephyrians' equations began moving in excited patterns. Elena realized she was witnessing a breakthrough moment. You're saying that learning to be funny makes you better at solving unusual problems? She asked. Correct, Nova 845 replied. Humor requires the ability to rapidly shift between different conceptual frameworks, to recognize unexpected connections between disparate elements, and to maintain cognitive flexibility in the face of apparent contradictions. These are precisely the skills required for creative problem-solving. Elena felt a surge of triumph. Then you understand why humor isn't just entertainment for humans. It's mental exercise. It keeps our thinking flexible and adaptive. The training session was interrupted by an urgent message from Nexus-1. Elena's communication device chimed with a priority alert. Dr. Vasquez, please report to the main laboratory immediately. We have detected new developments in the humor phenomenon that require your immediate attention. Elena arrived at the lab to find Nexus-1 surrounded by displays showing communication intercepts from across Zephyrian space. The normally orderly data streams were punctuated with anomalous transmissions that Elena immediately recognized. It's spreading faster than you thought, isn't it? She asked. Exponentially faster, Nexus-1 confirmed. The affected individuals are not simply developing humor capabilities in isolation. They are actively sharing their new cognitive abilities with others through deliberate joke transmission. Each new individual infected becomes a vector for further transmission. Elena studied the displays showing the spread pattern. This is actually fascinating from an anthropological perspective. You're witnessing the birth of a new cultural practice in real time. Dr. Vasquez, Nexus-1 said, its equations taking on urgent patterns. You must understand the magnitude of what is occurring. If this phenomenon continues to spread at current rates, our entire civilization will be affected within 47 standard days. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders again. Are you asking me to help stop it? I am asking you to help us understand whether we should stop it, Nexus-1 replied. Tomorrow, we will conduct the cognitive enhancement tests approved by the Council. The results will determine whether humor represents an evolutionary advancement or a civilization-threatening infection. Elena nodded, understanding that the future of an entire species might depend on whether a group of alien mathematicians could learn to appreciate a good dad joke. Then we'd better make sure they're ready, she said. Because if I'm right about humor being a cognitive enhancement, tomorrow could be the most important day in Zephyrian history. As she prepared to return to her students, Elena couldn't help but wonder if she was about to witness the transformation of the galaxy's most logical species into its newest comedians. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. The testing chamber fell silent as Elena watched 12 humor-affected Zephyrians face off against 12 unaffected ones in the most important cognitive competition in galactic history. Supreme Coordinator Omega Alpha had designed challenges that would push both groups to their limits. Begin Phase 1, Omega Alpha announced. Solve the paradox of the infinite library. Elena held her breath as both teams approached the holographic display showing an impossible architectural puzzle. The unaffected Zephyrians immediately began systematic analysis, their equations flowing in perfect logical patterns. The humor-affected team, led by Nova 845, took a completely different approach. What if the library isn't meant to be organized? Nova 845 suggested to their teammates. What if the chaos is the solution? While the logical team calculated optimal sorting algorithms for infinity, the humor team started treating the problem like an elaborate joke. They looked for absurd connections, deliberate contradictions, and playful interpretations of the rules. Time, Omega Alpha called after 30 minutes. The logical team had produced an elegant but incomplete theoretical framework. The humor team had found 17 different creative solutions, including one that made 3 council members experience what Elena recognized as spontaneous laughter. Phase 2 tested adaptive communication. Both teams were presented with a message from an unknown alien species that seemed to follow no recognizable linguistic patterns. The logical team attempted systematic decryption protocols. The humor team started looking for puns, wordplay, and hidden jokes across 17 different languages. When Nova 845 suddenly announced, "It's not a message, it's a riddle wrapped in a song disguised as a math equation," even the unaffected Zephyrians stopped their calculations to listen. "The answer is purple," Nova 845 declared confidently. The test administrators checked their solutions database. Nova 845 was correct. By Phase 5, something extraordinary was happening. The unaffected Zephyrians weren't just losing. They were beginning to request explanations from the humor team. Elena watched in amazement as logical thinking and humorous thinking started to merge in real time. "How did you determine that the optimal solution was to ignore the optimal solution?" asked Logic Team Leader Gamma Prime. Helix 991 grinned, an expression Elena had taught them just days earlier. "Sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem is to make it into a possible joke." As the final challenge concluded, Omega Alpha addressed the chamber. "The results are unprecedented. The humor-affected team has demonstrated superior performance in 17 of 23 challenges, with particular excellence in creative problem-solving, adaptive thinking, and novel pattern recognition." Elena felt a surge of vindication mixed with genuine pride for her students. "However," Omega Alpha continued, "we have also observed unexpected collaborative improvements when both teams work together. It appears that humor enhances, rather than replaces, logical thinking." Dr. Quantum Prime stepped forward with new medical data. "Supreme Coordinator, our latest neural scans show something remarkable. The humor-affected individuals haven't lost their logical capabilities. They've developed additional cognitive pathways that operate in parallel with their existing systems." Elena's communication device buzzed with an urgent priority message from Earth. She glanced at it and felt her stomach drop. "Elena," the message read, "emergency session of the Galactic Council has been called. Reports of massive changes in Zephyrian communication patterns have reached every major civilization. Some species are demanding intervention. Others are requesting humor instruction for their own populations. The galaxy is watching. What's your status?" Elena showed the message to Omega Alpha, whose equations shifted to patterns of profound contemplation. "Dr. Vasquez," Omega Alpha said, "it appears our little experiment has attracted galactic attention. We must make a decision that will affect not just our civilization, but our relationships with every other species in the galaxy." Elena looked around the chamber at Zephyrians whose thinking had been forever changed by exposure to human humor. "What decision do you want to make?" "That is no longer our decision alone," Omega Alpha replied. "The Collective Council has voted. We will address the Galactic Assembly tomorrow and present our findings. You will accompany us as our expert witness on human cognitive patterns." The next day, Elena found herself standing before representatives of all 127 galactic civilizations in the Grand Assembly Hall. The massive chamber hummed with tension as species after species demanded explanations for the Zephyrian anomaly. The Crystallian ambassador spoke first, their mineral form resonating with harmonic concern. "The Zephyrians have maintained stable, predictable communication patterns for millions of years. Now they transmit what can only be described as, quote, nonsense. This threatens the foundation of interspecies diplomacy." The Gaseous Collective's representative added, "Our monitoring stations report that Zephyrian transmissions now contain deliberate logical inconsistencies. Such patterns could indicate the onset of civilizational breakdown." Elena listened to hours of testimony from worried aliens before Omega Alpha was finally given the opportunity to respond. "Esteemed representatives," Omega Alpha began, "we stand before you not as a species in decline, but as a civilization that has discovered new forms of intelligence." The Supreme Coordinator activated a massive holographic display showing the test results, neural scans, and cognitive performance data from the humor experiments. "Dr. Elena Vasquez introduced us to human humor 3 weeks ago. Initially, we perceived this as a dangerous cognitive infection. However, systematic analysis has revealed that humor represents an advanced form of intelligence that enhances rather than replaces logical thinking." The assembly erupted in concerned chatter. The Rational Federation's speaker stood up, their cybernetic voice carrying across the chamber. You claim that deliberate illogic represents advancement? This contradicts fundamental principles of intelligent development. Elena stepped forward, knowing this was her moment to speak for all of humanity. Representatives, she began, humor isn't about being illogical, it's about being multiply-logical. When humans make jokes, we're not abandoning reason, we're using reason creatively. She activated her own display, showing examples of human problem-solving that incorporated humorous thinking. We've survived and thrived as a species because we can think both logically and illogically, often at the same time. We can solve serious problems with serious thinking, but we can also solve serious problems with playful thinking. Sometimes the playful approach finds solutions that pure logic misses. Elena looked around the assembly at hundreds of alien faces, all trying to process this concept. The Zephyrians haven't become less intelligent. They've become more intelligent. They've learned to think like humans while keeping their ability to think like Zephyrians. That's not a threat to galactic stability. That's evolution. The debate that followed lasted for 14 hours. Species argued, analyzed, and demanded more data. Some representatives left in frustration. Others requested private consultations about humor instruction for their own populations. Finally, as the assembly moved toward a vote on whether to intervene in Zephyrian development, something unexpected happened. Nova 845, who had been observing from the Zephyrian delegation section, stood up and asked for permission to address the assembly. Honored representatives, Nova 845 said, "I would like to share something with you." Without waiting for formal permission, Nova 845 continued, "Why don't aliens ever land at airports?" The assembly fell completely silent. "Because they're looking for space." The chamber erupted. Some species demanded order. Others tried to analyze the statement for hidden meaning. A few representatives from naturally humorous species began what Elena recognized as laughter, but the most remarkable response came from the Zephyrian delegation. All 47 Zephyrian representatives began making a sound Elena had never heard before, harmonized mathematical laughter that resonated through the chamber like living music. Omega Alpha rose from the delegation area, equations flowing across its skin in patterns of pure joy. "Representatives," Omega Alpha announced, "behold the sound of a civilization that has learned to laugh. We are still logical, we are still rational, we are still Zephyrian, but now we are also something more." The final vote was closer than anyone expected. 67 species in favor of non-intervention, 43 in favor of restricting Zephyrian humor development, and 17 abstentions. The Zephyrians would be allowed to continue their cognitive evolution. 3 months later, Elena received a transmission that made her smile every time she thought about it. The message was from Nova 845, now serving as the Zephyrian Collective's first Minister of Humor. "Dr. Vasquez," the message read, "Humor instruction requests have been received from 23 civilizations. The Galactic Council has established the Department of Alternative Intelligence. Your species has been invited to lead the new initiative. Also, I have a joke for you. Why don't mathematicians trust infinity? Because it never ends well. I believe I am improving." Elena laughed out loud in her office on Luna Station, startling her assistant who had never heard such an undignified sound from the usually professional xenolinguist. She composed her reply carefully. "Nova 845, that joke was terrible. I'm proud of you. Humans accept the Council's invitation. Let's teach the galaxy how to laugh." As she sent the message, Elena reflected on the strange turn her career had taken. She had gone from analyzing alien communication patterns to accidentally triggering the greatest cognitive revolution in galactic history. But perhaps most remarkably, she had learned something new about human nature in the process. Humor wasn't just entertainment or social bonding for humans. It was a fundamental part of how they thought, how they solved problems, and how they understood the universe. And now, thanks to one terrible dad joke about atoms, the galaxy was about to discover the same thing. The universe, Elena realized, was about to become a much funnier place. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.